Welcome! You're listening to the Uncharted Lancaster podcast, where we explore the hidden histories, forgotten places, and long-buried secrets of Lancaster County. Using modern digital storytelling tools, each episode brings a new piece of local lore to life, revealing the strange, the surprising, and the stories history left behind. Let's begin.
Picture the United States Senate chamber. It's September 21st, 1789.
Right, and the tension in that room is just, it's thick enough to cut with a bayonet.
Exactly. The roll call has literally just finished, and the vote is a dead heat. It's 9-9.
And you have Vice President John Adams sitting there in the presiding chair, holding the gavel.
Yeah, he has to break the tie. And the wild thing is, the entire geographic and really the political future of the United States hangs on the very next syllable that comes out of his mouth.
It is a moment of just unparalleled consequence because, they aren't voting on a tax or a trade treaty.
No, they're voting on where to plant the permanent capital of this brand new nation.
Right.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today is Monday, July 13th, 2026, and we are so glad you are here with us for this one.
We really are, because this is one of those historical moments that just flips everything you think you know upside down.
It totally does. Because Look, when you look at a map of the United States today, you see Washington, D.C. sitting there on the Potomac River.
Yeah, and it gives off this illusion of absolute permanence. It was always meant to be there.
Right. You just assume it was this grand, inevitable design that the founding fathers, carved into the bedrock.
But in that room in 1789, that map was basically drawn in smudged pencil.
It really was. And the location that was literally one single tie-breaking vote away from becoming the center of American power, it wasn't some swamp between Maryland and Virginia.
No, it was a chaotic, muddy frontier river town in Pennsylvania called Columbia.
Columbia, Pennsylvania. I want you to just imagine a reality where Washington, D.C. simply does not exist.
It completely shatters our modern perception.
Absolutely. So our mission today is to unpack this mind-bending alternate history because we've stacked up some amazing sources for this deep dive.
Yes, we are pulling from historical deep dives by Uncharted Lancaster, actual records from the National Archives, and comprehensive historical encyclopedias detailing the borough of Columbia.
Right, because Columbia wasn't just some political footnote. The story of this town is it's a collision of deadly river crossings, desperate engineering marvels, and brutal racial violence.
Not to mention a literal scorched earth sacrifice that completely altered the course of the Civil War.
Exactly. So let's jump in, because to understand how this little frontier settlement almost became the seat of a global superpower, we have to look at how desperate the early American government actually was.
Oh, they were incredibly desperate. They needed a home, and they needed it fast.
Yeah, because in the 1770s and 1780s, the U.S. capital was essentially a nomad.
Right, just bouncing all over the eastern seaboard.
Philadelphia, Annapolis, New York. They were acting like a couch surfing startup.
A couch surfing startup. I love that.
It's true, though. They had this grand world-changing vision, but they kept having to pack their bags and move into somebody else's guest room.
Well, and it wasn't just inconvenient to couch surf. It was incredibly dangerous. It was humiliating for them.
Why was it so dangerous, though? Was there a sense of panic in Congress, or was this just a strategic real estate grab?
Oh, there was absolute panic. We have to look at the mechanism driving this. So in June of 1783, there was this event known as the Pennsylvania Mutiny.
Okay, the Pennsylvania Mutiny.
Right. The Continental Congress was meeting in Philadelphia, and a mob of furious, unpaid Continental Army soldiers literally surrounded the State House.
Wait, their own soldiers?
Yes, their own soldiers. They essentially held the government hostage because they wanted their back pay from the Revolutionary War.
Wow. So Congress is trapped, and they turn to the state of Pennsylvania hey, call out the local militia. Protect us.
Precisely. And the governor of Pennsylvania, John Dickinson, he flat out refuses.
You're kidding.
No, he actually sympathized with the soldiers, and he didn't want to risk a bloodbath. So Congress had to literally sneak out of Philadelphia and flee to Princeton, New Jersey.
That is wild. That had to be a massive trauma for the founding fathers.
It was. It proved that if the federal government was a guest in a sovereign state, they were completely at the mercy of that state's politics.
That makes total sense, because if the state legislature gets mad at, say, a federal tax policy,
right,
they could just pull the security detail or shut down the roads or, cut off the water supply.
Exactly why Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution was written. The framers demanded a federal district.
The famous 10 miles square.
Right. A district not exceeding 10 miles square, ceded by states, where Congress would exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever.
They needed absolute sovereignty.
They needed a fortress,
Yeah.
a place for forts, arsenals, dockyards, completely insulated from the whims of state governors.
So, 1788 rolls around, the Constitution is ratified, this massive funding is secured, and the call goes out.
The ultimate 18th century real estate sweepstakes.
Yeah, and Congress is just flooded with petitions. People are pitching towns in New Jersey, Maryland, New York.
But then, on September 7th, 1789, this specific resolution hits the floor to put the capital on the east bank of the Susquehanna River in Pennsylvania.
And this wasn't just some empty patch of woods they were pitching, right?
No, it was a very specific location managed by a man named Samuel Wright.
Samuel Wright. This guy is a fascinating character. He's the proprietor of this town, which was originally called Wright's Ferry.
Right.
And in the spring of 1788, he clearly senses the political winds shifting. So he surveys his land and he lays out 160 building lots.
But he doesn't just draw a map. I mean, he actively weaponizes 18th century marketing.
Yeah, he sets aside this massive tract of prime real estate. He called it a square and a half.
Right.
And he explicitly designates it on his map for the future U.S. capital.
He was engineering a speculative boom.
Yeah.
You have to remember, land speculation was basically the high-risk venture capitalism of the 1780s.
Oh, absolutely. So he distributes these lots using a lottery system. People are paying 15 shillings a ticket just for the chance to draw a premium lot.
And the people buying these tickets were called adventurers. They weren't looking to build a log cabin and farm.
No, they were banking on the federal government showing up so they could flip the land for this exorbitant profit.
Exactly. It's the 18th century version of buying up domain names in the early 90s, hoping Microsoft wants one.
That is the perfect analogy. And Wright even goes a step further. He actually rebrands the whole town.
He does. He strips away that frontier-sounding name, Wright's Ferry.
Right, and he renames it Columbia, which is just tapping right into that whole post-revolutionary obsession with Christopher Columbus.
It was a highly calculated move to tap into patriotism. Columbia was the symbol of American manifest destiny.
But let me push back on this for a second. Was renaming the town to Columbia just like the 18th century equivalent of a cheap marketing gimmick? I mean, did Congress really take this tiny river town seriously just because they slapped a patriotic name on it?
They did, but not just because of the name. The name was the gimmick, but the geography was incredibly serious. The Susquehanna River was viewed as this vital artery to the western frontier.
Okay.
Even George Washington expressed favor for the Columbia location. He saw the logic in a capital that bridged the established eastern seaboard and the expanding west.
Wow. Okay, so Washington likes it. The location is strategic, which brings us back to that knife-edge vote in the Senate in September 1789.
Right.
If the president likes it and a bill actually makes it to the floor to strike the deal, how does it all fall apart?
It falls apart because of a bitter, deeply personal financial war between the two senators from Pennsylvania.
The ultimate betrayal.
William McClay and Robert Morris. It is the intrastate rivalry that literally changed American geography.
Okay, let's look at their portfolios because this is wild. You have William McClay. He is an agrarian.
Yes.
And he has massive land holdings out west, very close to the Susquehanna River.
So an inland capital makes him incredibly wealthy and powerful.
Exactly. But then you have Pennsylvania's other senator, Robert Morris. Now, Morris is known as the financier of the Revolution.
Right. He is a wildly wealthy merchant based in Philadelphia.
Yeah, he owns ships, he owns banks, trading companies. His entire empire requires the seat of power to remain right there in his backyard on the coast.
Morris simply cannot afford for the capital to move west to Columbia. It would shift the center of economic gravity entirely away from his Philadelphia ports.
So what does he do? He actively sabotages his own state's western bid.
He really did. Months earlier, on March 5th, he had formally offered Congress the permanent use of all public buildings in Philadelphia.
Just trying to lure them in.
Exactly. So when the bill for Columbia comes up on September 21st, a motion is introduced to strike the Susquehanna location entirely.
And replace it with Philadelphia, Chester, and Bucks counties.
Right, including Germantown.
So Senator Morris votes to kill Columbia, Senator McClay votes to save it, and the Senate completely deadlocks at 9-9.
Which brings in the vice president, John Adams. He has the tie-breaking power.
I always wonder about the mechanics of that specific moment. Like, Was Adams heavily lobbied by Morris behind closed doors?
It's very likely.
Or did Adams, just as a Massachusetts man, intrinsically favor a coastal established city over some muddy river town?
It was almost certainly a combination of both. Adams had a deep disdain for the untamed frontier, and so he voted yay on the motion to strike Columbia.
And just like that, with one single vote, he derailed the entire project. Columbia's dream is dead.
It threw the capital debate back into total chaos, which of course ultimately led to the famous Compromise of 1790.
Right, the July 16 deal, the whole room where it happens moment between Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and Alexander Hamilton.
Exactly. The Southerners agreed to Hamilton's federal assumption of state debts, and in exchange, they get the permanent capital built on the Potomac after a 10-year stint in Philly.
But I want you to really think about how wild that is. The geography of our modern political world came down to one state's senators hating each other's investments.
And one tie-breaking vote by John Adams. If Adams clears his throat and votes nay, Columbia stays in the bill.
Okay, so if that had happened, what kind of town would Congress have actually inherited? Because we need to rewind to its chaotic origins to really understand.
Oh, yes. Because Samuel Wright's shiny Columbia branding was hiding a reality that was, frankly, completely wild.
Yeah, this was not a refined, paved cosmopolitan center.
Not at all. It was the Wild West of the East. It was a logistical bottleneck defined by immense physical danger.
Right. And, the history of the area goes deep. Long before Samuel Wright did his little lottery, this was a critical indigenous hub.
Yes. The Susquehannock people migrated there in the late 1500s. And later, the Shawnee established settlements, specifically along Shawnee Creek.
Yeah, early European traders actually referred to the area simply as Shawanatown.
The colonial footprint starts around 1724 with an English Quaker from Chester County named John Wright.
Who I assume is where Wright's Ferry comes from.
Exactly. He gets a grant originally stemming from William Penn, heads out to the Susquehanna, and starts proselytizing to the Native Americans.
He builds a log cabin, and soon he brings in a whole crew. People like Robert Barber, Samuel Blunston. They start developing the land.
We also see the influence of Susanna Wright. She's this extraordinary figure who built the oldest existing house there, the Wright's Ferry Mansion, in 1738.
And she wasn't just building houses. She was raising silkworms, practicing early medicine, and doing all this vital diplomacy with the Native American populations.
She was acting as a prothonotary. The settlement was rapidly becoming this crucial frontier outpost.
But the real beating heart of this outpost was the ferry itself. John Wright patents the ferry in 1730 to cross the Susquehanna.
And we have to be clear about what ferry means in 1730. When we hear that word today, we picture a massive steel boat with a diesel engine, right?
Right, smooth sailing across a bay.
The 1730 Wright's ferry was the stuff of nightmares.
It really was. The engineering was so primitive. I mean, they didn't have the materials to build massive flat-bottomed barges. So what do they use?
Dugout canoes.
It's bonkers. Let's break down the mechanics of this contraction for you. They took two massive dugout canoes, set them parallel to each other in the water,
Okay.
and then they lashed them together. But they didn't just use ropes. They used heavy wooden carriage and wagon wheels to bridge the gap and create this rigid makeshift platform.
And the propulsion system was entirely biological. They didn't have sails. They didn't use oars. The ferry was drawn by cattle.
This is the part that just blows my mind. You have a platform balanced on two hollowed-out trees. It's loaded down with heavy freight wagons, horses, and terrified passengers.
Right.
And you tie this entire heavy mess to a team of swimming oxen.
Swimming oxen.
Yes. The ferryman is in one of the canoes, holding a rope attached to a led ox, trying to guide it across a massive, fast-flowing river.
And the risk factor here is so high because it involves animal psychology as much as hydrodynamics. Oxen are herd animals.
Right, they follow the leader blindly.
Yes. So if the water gets too choppy, or if that led ox gets water in its ear and panics, it completely loses its sense of direction.
Oh, no.
It starts swimming in a circle. And because of the herd instinct, the other oxen just follow it.
So you end up with a team of massive animals caught in a vortex of their own making, just swimming in an endless circle in the middle of a deep river.
And they would literally swim until they exhausted themselves and drowned, taking the entire team down and likely capsizing the canoe platform right along with them.
That is terrifying. It's like being stuck at a chaotic airport during a holiday blizzard, but with the added risk of your engine, the oxen just drowning everyone.
Exactly. Imagine being an elite European diplomat in 1790, wearing a powdered wig and silk stockings, on your way to meet the President of the United States.
And suddenly your aquatic cows start doing donuts in the river.
It highlights the absolute absurdity of putting the national capital there at that specific time. The infrastructure was wholly inadequate.
But despite the danger of, drowning in a bovine whirlpool, this ferry was a massive, highly regulated business.
It was. The toll system was incredibly strict.
Yeah, it was 9 shillings if you had a coach with 4 passengers drawn by 5 horses. A 4-horse wagon was 3 shillings and 9 pence. If you were just a guy on a horse, it cost you 6 pence.
They essentially held a monopoly on westward expansion in that corridor, at least until Anderson's Ferry opened up and sparked a price war in 1787.
And the volume of traffic they were dealing with was just staggering. We think of traffic as a modern invention, but this ferry was a bottleneck for the entire westward migration of the country.
You would have up to 200 massive Conestoga wagons backed up on the Columbia side of the river.
Just a total paralysis of commerce, families and merchants camping out in the mud for days just for a chance to risk their lives on these canoes.
It got so bad they had to invent an early form of industrial logistics just to prevent riots in the queue.
Yes, the chalk numbers. This is amazing. The ferrymen would literally walk down the line of 200 wagons with a piece of chalk, writing numbers on the side of the wooden wagons to establish their place in line.
It's like taking a number at a chaotic 18th century deli.
Exactly. But obviously, a numbering system written in chalk doesn't solve the core physical limit of the river.
Right. The town was suffocating on its own traffic.
Yeah.
As the 19th century dawned, the era of swimming cattle just had to end.
And that necessity sparks an era of mind-boggling engineering, because if you can't float across it safely, you build over it.
Yes. Welcome to the boom years.
In 1814, Columbia executes a project that commands global attention. They build the longest covered bridge in the entire world across the Susquehanna.
It was a monumental achievement in timber engineering.
Right.
We're talking about a structure 5,690 feet long.
Over a mile.
Over a mile of continuous covered wooden truss work. It was 30 feet wide, supported by 54 massive stone piers built directly into the riverbed.
Think about the labor required for that in 1814. Hand-cutting stone, sinking it into a rushing river without modern cofferdams or hydraulic pumps.
And it worked. It completely bypassed the ferry bottleneck overnight. Suddenly, wagons could just roll right across.
But the Susquehanna is notorious for ice gorges.
No, yes. During the spring thaw, massive chunks of ice would break loose upriver. They behaved like slow-moving, crushing glaciers.
And in the winter of 1832, a severe weather event caused an ice gorge that completely annihilated that 1814 bridge.
Just tore those massive stone piers apart.
But the economic engine of Columbia couldn't afford to be severed. They didn't even hesitate. Within 2 years, by 1834, they built a replacement covered bridge.
And it was staggeringly expensive. It cost $157,300 in 1834 dollars.
Which translates to tens of millions of dollars in modern equivalent economic power.
Easily. But while they were rebuilding the bridge, an even more ambitious structural shift was happening across the entire state.
Right, the main line of public works legislation passed in 1826.
This was the era of canal mania. New York had just finished the Erie Canal, and they were getting filthy rich, siphoning all the trade from the Great Lakes directly to New York City.
So Pennsylvania panicked. They needed a superhighway of their own to connect the western territories to Philadelphia.
Their vision was to build an interlocking system of canals and navigations to bypass the treacherous river rapids.
And they successfully dug a 40-mile stretch connecting Columbia North to the Juniata River. But the master plan called for an 82-mile canal cutting straight overland to Philadelphia.
And here's where they hit a catastrophic engineering wall.
Yeah, they hit a hydrological impossibility. Why didn't it work?
To understand why the canal failed, we have to look at the topography. A canal is basically a series of level water steps. To cross the elevation, you have to build a summit level, the highest point of the canal.
And water flows downhill. Every time a boat goes through a lock, thousands of gallons flush down to the lower level.
Precisely. So to keep a canal operating, you need a massive, reliable water source, like a high-elevation lake or a diverted river, constantly feeding that summit level to replace the lost water.
And when the engineers surveyed that 82-mile route to Philly, they realized the watershed at the summit simply couldn't provide enough water.
They couldn't keep the ditch wet.
It's hilarious, but also terrifying for a state government that just bet its economic future on water transport.
They were facing total infrastructural collapse.
Right.
But the pivot they made was one of the most remarkable decisions in early American history.
Right. When they realized water wouldn't work, they didn't just give up. They completely abandoned the canal to Philly and bet the entire state's fortune on highly experimental technology.
The railroad. They pivoted to the Philadelphia and Columbia Railroad.
Which, I just want to contextualize this risk for you. This is the early 1830s. Weren't railroads virtually unproven at this time?
Absolutely. There are maybe a half dozen functional commercial railways on the entire planet. They didn't have standardized tracks. They didn't have reliable brakes.
Wasn't pivoting from a canal to a railroad at that time incredibly reckless for a state government?
It was incredibly reckless, but necessity drove the innovation. It became one of the first common carrier commercial railways in the country.
Wow.
But there was a catch. Because of the severe elevation changes leaving Columbia, standard steam locomotives of the day couldn't pull the trains up the hills.
The wheels would just spin on the iron rails, so what's the solution?
They implemented inclined plain cable railways.
Oh, this is peak steampunk logistics. Tell us how this worked.
They built massive stationary steam engines at the top of these steep hills. They would detach the train cars from the locomotive at the bottom, hook them to a continuous thick hemp rope.
Okay.
And the stationary steam engine would physically winch the train cars up the 9% grade hill. Once at the top, they'd hook them to another locomotive for the flat stretch.
That is just wild. And it creates this surreal intersection of technologies right in Columbia. You have canal boats coming down from the north, hitting Columbia.
But the railroad to Philadelphia is on the other side of the river.
Exactly. So how do they bridge the gap? With an engineering patchwork. They modified that new replacement covered bridge we just talked about.
Right, they built a two-tiered towpath along the side of the bridge.
So picture this. You have a covered bridge with a wooden walkway bolted to the side of it. They took teams of horses or mules, walk them out onto this bridge over the river, and drop tow lines down to the canal boats floating in the water below.
And the mules on the bridge would literally drag the heavy canal boats across the width of the Susquehanna to connect with the rail yards.
Water, steam, iron rails, timber trusses, and animal muscle, all synchronizing in this one bustling borough.
Columbia became one of the most vital, wealthy transfer points in the entire country.
But this industrial boom brings us to a deeply disturbing contradiction. Because while the infrastructure was uniting the state, the social fabric of Columbia was violently tearing itself apart.
Yes, we have to look at the collision of race, labor, and freedom in pre-Civil War Columbia. The town was living a dangerous double life.
Because of its location, right across the river from slaveholding Maryland, and its massive transportation network, Columbia became a hyperactive hub on the Underground Railroad.
The local abolitionist networks, heavily supported by the Quaker population and free black residents, were incredibly organized.
They were hiding escaping enslaved people in the false bottoms of wagons, in rail cars, in safe houses along the riverbank.
It was an operation of remarkable efficiency. Slave catchers coming up from the south would track runaways as far as Columbia, and the trail would simply vanish.
The escaped slaves were being integrated into this rapid transit network and moved quickly north to New York or Canada.
The sources of the era actually credit one frustrated slave catcher in Columbia with coining the term itself.
Wait, really? The actual term Underground Railroad?
Yes, he allegedly threw up his hands and said it was as if the runaways had vanished on an underground railroad.
That is incredible. So Columbia is this beacon of literal liberation, an engine of freedom, but simultaneously the town was fostering a virulent, violent strain of racism.
Driven heavily by economic anxiety among the white working class. And this explodes in August of 1834.
The 1834 Columbia Race Riots. A brutal 3-day siege of violence directed entirely at the town's free black population.
We have to understand the mechanics of this violence, because it wasn't random. It was deeply rooted in the shifting economics of the industrial boom.
Right. How should we reconcile this? How does a town serve as a beacon of liberation while simultaneously exiling its own free black citizens?
Well, the 1830s saw an influx of working-class white laborers, many of them recent immigrants, coming to work on the railroads and canals.
And at the same time, the free black population of the town was growing. Many had established themselves as property owners, artisans, and skilled laborers.
And the elite employers of the town, the factory owners, were playing a very dangerous game. They were using free black labor as a wedge, threatening to hire black workers to undercut the wages of the white laborers.
It's a classic tactic of manufactured class warfare. The elites pit the working classes against each other to suppress wages overall.
Exactly. And the white laborers terrified of losing their economic standing and deeply influenced by racist rhetoric, misdirected their rage entirely at the Black community.
Instead of the employers exploiting them and, impartially analyzing the historical text, the declarations drafted by the white rioters lay it out plainly.
They explicitly stated they feared a plot by employers and abolitionists to open up new trades to Black workers, which would, in their words, break down the distinctive barrier between the colors.
They were terrified their wages would be degraded to the level of slaves. So in August 1834, the violence begins. Mobs of white men marched into the predominantly Black neighborhoods.
And they systematically targeted the homes of Black freeholders, the property owners.
They weren't just causing property damage, they were executing a forced exile. They smashed windows, broke down doors, physically beat Black residents.
They demanded that all colored freeholders abandon their property and leave the borough forever.
Many Black families were forced to flee into the surrounding woods for days, just hiding from the mobs while their homes were destroyed.
It forces us to confront the complex, often hypocritical reality of northern states prior to the Civil War.
Yeah, does this contradiction reflect the broader growing pains of pre-Civil War America?
Absolutely. Abolitionism did not equate to a belief in racial equality or integration. Many white Northerners abhorred slavery, but remained fiercely hostile to living or working alongside free Black Americans.
Columbia was basically a microcosm of the national powder keg.
And that powder keg was about to ignite. 3 decades later, the broader tensions of the country would literally march right up to the banks of the Susquehanna River in Columbia.
The Civil War. And I really want to highlight the incredible resilience of Columbia's Black community here, because despite the horrific betrayal of those 1834 riots, when the war broke out, dozens of Black men from Columbia enlisted to fight for the Union.
They recognized that the destruction of the Confederacy was the paramount objective. Many joined the 54th Massachusetts Infantry, the legendary all-Black regiment.
Including a specific soldier from Columbia, Stephen Swales.
Yes. Swales fought with such bravery that he was promoted, becoming arguably the very first African-American officer commissioned in the United States military from the Civil War.
What an incredible legacy. But Columbia's role in the war wasn't limited to the soldiers it sent away. In the summer of 1863, the war came directly for Columbia's multi-million-dollar covered bridge.
June 1863. The Gettysburg Campaign. Confederate General Robert E. Lee has crossed into Pennsylvania.
His army is a massive, highly experienced force, and they are essentially operating in the North with impunity.
Lee develops a highly aggressive geometric strategy to cripple Pennsylvania. He splits his forces.
Right.
He orders General Jubal Early to push eastward. Early delegates the point of the spear to General John B. Gordon, and the objective is crystal clear: capture the covered bridge at Columbia.
The strategic value of that bridge is just immense. If Gordon's troops can cross the Susquehanna at Columbia, they can pivot north and attack the state capital of Harrisburg entirely from the rear,
completely bypassing the Union defenses built on the western side of the river. Furthermore, once across, they have an open, undefended highway straight to Philadelphia.
They could destroy the Pennsylvania railroad yards, sever the Union's main supply arteries, and capture immense industrial wealth.
General Early's specific orders to Gordon were to capture the bridge intact if possible, but to burn it rather than let the Union use it.
But as Gordon's hardened Confederate veterans march into the town of Wrightsville, which is right across the river from Columbia, the dynamic completely flips.
Defending the bridge on the Wrightsville side was a woefully outmatched Union force, commanded by Colonel Jacob G. Frick and Major Granville O. Haller.
And they were backed up by incredibly green, unblooded Pennsylvania state militia. I mean, some of these militia members were literally civilians who had picked up a musket a few days prior.
They engage in a brief skirmish, but Colonel Frick realizes very quickly that this is a slaughter waiting to happen. The Confederates are flanking them.
So the Union forces retreat back across the massive covered bridge into Columbia, and Frick is faced with this agonizing, scorched earth decision.
If he leaves the bridge standing, Gordon's army pours across, and the eastern seaboard of the United States falls open to Robert E. Lee.
Imagine having to burn down your own multi-million-dollar driveway to prevent a home invasion, knowing it would bankrupt you just to save the rest of the neighborhood.
That's exactly it. He has to sever the aorta. Frick orders the bridge destroyed. Initially, they actually try to blow it up.
Yeah, they pack a span of the bridge with gunpowder and detonate it, hoping to drop a section into the river. But it doesn't work.
19th century timber engineering was remarkably resilient. The explosion splinters the wood, but the arched trusses hold the bridge up.
So they have to resort to fire. And remember, the structure is enclosed. It's essentially a mile-long wooden chimney sitting over a river.
Frick's men pour oil on the splintered timbers and light it. The wind was blowing east, directly toward the town of Columbia.
The fire catches the dry roof shingles and just tears across the mile-long structure with terrifying speed. Imagine standing on the banks of Columbia, watching your economic lifeline roar into a wall of flames.
Burning embers are showering down on the town, threatening to catch the waterfront warehouses and homes on fire. They had to form bucket brigades just to stop Columbia from burning down.
Even General Gordon's Confederate men on the opposite bank joined the local Wrightsville bucket brigades to stop the fire from spreading to the western side.
But the strategic impact of lighting that match changed the entire geometry of the Civil War. By burning the bridge, Frick erected an impassable water barrier.
He denied Lee the eastern crossing, and almost simultaneously, Lee receives intelligence that the massive Union Army of the Potomac is moving rapidly north into Pennsylvania,
Setting his supply lines. Because Lee's forces are scattered, he has to hit the panic button.
He issues an urgent recall order, commanding all his scattered divisions to withdraw and concentrate at a central hub.
He orders them to fall back to the vicinity of Cashtown and Gettysburg.
The burning of the Columbia Bridge physically repels the Confederate vanguard and forces Lee to pull his army back into that fateful collision at Gettysburg just 3 days later.
And there's a critical psychological component, too. Gordon assumed that because his veteran troops so easily brushed aside the militia at Wrightsville, the only defensive forces in Pennsylvania were inefficient local militia,
which directly influenced the tactical arrogance of the Confederates on July 1st at Gettysburg. They aggressively pushed engagements, assuming they were facing weak militia,
only to slam into the elite, hardened veterans of the Union's Iron Brigade.
The ashes of the Columbia Bridge directly seeded the bloodiest battle in North American history, and for the people of Columbia, the sacrifice was total.
They bankrupted their own infrastructure. The corporate owners of the bridge actually spent a century trying to get the federal government to pay them back.
Yeah, they petitioned Congress into the 1960s, citing the Fifth Amendment, and Congress never paid them a dime.
But Columbia didn't fold. After the war, the town entered an industrial golden age.
Driven by rail transport and the smelting of pig iron using anthracite coal. By 1887, there were 13 massive blast furnaces operating within a 3-mile radius.
Anthracite coal is incredibly dense and pure carbon. It burns much hotter and cleaner, but it's hard to ignite.
Which is why they adopted the hot blast technique, injecting superheated air directly into the base of the furnace.
The visual of this is apocalyptic. 13 massive brick towers roaring 24 hours a day, belching smoke, pouring rivers of molten iron into sand bowls shaped like nursing pigs.
Hence, pig iron. The wealth generated was immense. In 1875, they built this massive 3-story brick town hall with a 900-seat grand opera house.
And a 140-foot bell tower. By 1900, the population had exploded to over 12,300 people.
But the life cycle of American industrial towns is ruthless. As technology shifted to Bessemer steel and coke-fueled production in Pittsburgh, Columbia's furnaces became obsolete.
The canals died. The original Wright's ferry made its final crossing in 1901. The Great Depression hit, the interstate highway bypassed them, and the town went quiet.
The massive 1875 town hall even burned to the ground in 1947, but Columbia adapted. Which brings us to a detail that is almost impossibly poetic.
Today, Columbia is home to the National Watch and Clock Museum, one of the premier horological institutes in the world.
Horology, the study of timekeeping. Isn't it fascinating that a town whose destiny was entirely shaped by being at the right or wrong place at the exact right or wrong time is now globally recognized for keeping time?
It is the perfect resting place for this story.
If Adams paused for 1 second, they're the capital. If Frick waited 10 minutes, Lee takes Philadelphia. It's all about timing.
And that leads to our final thought for you to mull over. Let's assume John Adams votes nay.
The ultimate counterfactual. Columbia becomes the 10-mile square. The capital is no longer nestled on the Potomac, flanked by the slaveholding societies of Virginia and Maryland.
Right. By placing the capital in Columbia, the political epicenter of the nation is permanently anchored in a northern, aggressively industrializing state.
A state that had already passed the Gradual Abolition Act in 1780. The physical seat of government would be surrounded by Quaker abolitionism and free Black communities.
How much of the Civil War, and indeed the entire cultural trajectory of the United States, was irrevocably altered because 2 Pennsylvania senators couldn't agree on a plot of land.
Does the South secede earlier? Does a northern capital strangle the expansion of slavery decades before the 1860s? History is drawn in pencil, and in 1789, John Adams happened to be holding the eraser. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Keep questioning the map, look for the mechanics behind the history.
And we will see you next time.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Uncharted Lancaster podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe and leave a rating or review wherever you listen. It really helps more people discover the show. For more fascinating local history, visit unchartedlancaster.com. And if you'd like to go deeper, check out one of Adam Zern's books at unchartedlancaster.com/books. Until next time, keep exploring.